Good afternoon. My name is Eric Miscoll. I am with Charlie Barnhart and Associates. I'm here to talk to you about the changing environment in electronics manufacturing. Thank you. I only have a half hour, so I'm going to talk incredibly fast. I'm going to give you a lot of information. I would invite you to follow up with us. Any questions, I'll try to allow some time, but if I'm here the next few days. If you want to have any discussions on any of this, I invite that conversation. I would tell you this, it is changing. There's a sea change underway, I think, in the electronics manufacturing industry. I think when we look back at the year 2012 and years to come, it'll be more evident how critical and a tipping point of a year this has been. I talk in acronyms when I speak, so the three main ones that I'll talk about are OEM, EMS, ODM. ODM are the original design manufacturers who, in its purest form, design and manufacture products for OEMs. EMS are the contract manufacturers. I'll skip through this so that you know about us. We're a consulting firm. Our data that we're going to reflect, that I'm going to reflect to you, is based on industry data. We look at case studies from the industry. A case study is a quote package. An OEM wants something built, they take it to the market. They ask a handful of EMS to quote the build of that particular product in one or multiple regions. One of those is a quote package. So a quote package could be inclusive of 4 or 5 different EMS quoting in 2 to 4 different regions. Currently, our data set has in excess of 6,000 case studies in it. If you don't like my data, what I tell people is change your practices, because all I'm doing is telling you what you're doing, and it's reflecting that data. I'm going to talk very quickly through these 6 major trends, and then hopefully have some time at the end for Q&A. I should say at the very beginning, we tend to have a fairly irreverent style about the industry. We don't take ourselves too seriously. We take your businesses seriously, but and we also have a pretty honest and direct style in addressing the issues in the industry. Some of you might recognize this slide. I use this as, there was something very noticeable this last year, and that's the uncertainty of the industry. In a previous life, I used to do industry forecasts for the EMS industry. If you look this last year, they were noticeably absent, or they were very abbreviated. And what I mean by that is they only reflected maybe a year or 2 out. In years past, we used to get, and I used to help produce, 5-year forecasts for the industry. If you look at this, all this does very simply is it reflects the growth of the industry, right? From 1991 through about 2010. The big blue one is the OEM cost of goods sold, which is the total available market, in theory, for manufacturing, electronic manufacturing companies. Then you have EMS revenues on there, and later on, in about 2000, we start reflecting the ODM revenues as they grew. The big story here is that most of it still happens within OEMs. Most of the manufacturing that happens is in OEMs. For the EMS industry, the biggest revenue generator is still printed circuit board assembly. Despite very aggressive approaches in the market by EMS companies in developing other services, aftermarket services, and everything, if you look 10 years ago till today as a percentage of their revenue, it moved the needle maybe 2 percentage points. So the OEM community truly hasn't been very adoptive of those services. The point here is that the pendulum of growth for the EMS industry reached its apex in 2Q. We predicted that about 2 years ago. I think, looking now, I think we were probably right on that one. That doesn't mean the EMS industry isn't going to grow. That means that the rate of growth, if you remember the rock and roll years back in the 80s and 90s, you were getting 20–30% growth rates year to year, right? It's single digit now. The best estimates moving forward tend to be about 4%. Some are smaller than that. So where the EMS industry is not experiencing the rock and roll, huge, aggressive growth that it used to, which one way to notice how, that trend is also to look at how many financial analysts cover the industry nowadays. Far fewer than did in the 90s and early 2000s. It's an old story now, escalating costs in China. China's gotten expensive for a lot of reasons. Fully burdened cost of labor in China is not what it used to be. Sorry. Somebody's stealing my phone right in front of me here. Thank you. Oh, okay. We've been forecasting for a while that it is increasing per month on a 1 to 1.5% basis. We expect that to continue moving forward for the next, and I'll size this here for you in just a moment. This has changed a lot of things. It's not just the manufacturing services, but for labor costs as overall for a lot of people who went there and took a lot of work to China, quite frankly, that should never have gone there in the first place. The forecast that we're talking about assumes that the yuan is allowed to, stays and is controlled as it is. If you let the yuan float more freely, these numbers would jump dramatically, and that's a game changer. What you see up here, industry average burden cost for direct labor. Direct labor is touch labor, the people who are building things. You look at that on an average basis in the first quarter for 4Q 2011 in the USA, Mexico, Central Mexico, which is inclusive of Guadalajara, Monterrey primarily, China and Malaysia. The surprising thing to most people is that China is not the lowest one on this list. China, you can certainly get something less sub $1 an hour for direct labor. The problem there is that the overhead cost is far higher than it is in other areas. And if you look at the forecast, what is circled up there, then what we had forecasted for 4Q 2012, so just over the course of that 1 year, the rate of growth in the direct labor costs in China was growing into 17.5%. That changed a lot of people's considerations. And again, this is an average rate. It varies by region. It varies by company. It varies. So there are a lot of factors that go in. We can Pareto down on that in different ways for you. The point is, it's more expensive. Listen, it's cheaper on a fully burdened cost of labor basis right now. The cheapest places that the electronics manufacturing industry is building in the world would be India, Mexico, Vietnam. Are all lower on a, now there's obviously reasons to build or not build in those regions, probably more reasons not to than to, but that's what that one's about. Return to regionalization. As a result of this, and probably it would have occurred anyway, is that OEMs and manufacturers are building in region for region again. I'm going to talk about risk here in a second, and the Avnet gentleman was talking about risk before. We look at risk all the time. Risk is just, it's what business is about, managing risk, right? In our analysis of all the data, the greatest predictor, the factor that's most correlated with risk in outsourced manufacturing is the number of supply chains, number of time zones that you put between the person ordering the product, the build, and where that build is being serviced. So you start it in the United States, you're building it in India. There's far more risk in that than if you're ordering it in the United States and building it in Mexico. So time zones, more risk. And so as a result, people are moving back in region. This is how the industry started. We all had, every region in the country, in the world has its low-cost region. The United States, we have Mexico, Western Europe has Eastern Europe, even Asia, you know, the high-cost areas in like Japan, what have you, discovered years ago, the Philippines, Vietnam, China. This is a definite trend. It's been going on, and I think it's here to stay. Hopefully it's not just another business cycle and we're all going to run off to sub-Saharan Africa someday because it's the lowest labor price in the world, which it is. I wouldn't recommend going there. The ODM supply base is changing. This has a major impact on EMS. It also gives a lot of opportunity for EMS. The ODMs, the original design manufacturer, were a great solution that OEMs ruined. And what I mean by that is ODMs were cheap because their support costs were lower. What happened is OEMs engaged with them and wanted the same level of service they were getting from their EMS. So the SG&A costs and the support costs for the ODMs have gone up. ODMs have simply been walking away from OEM business. The most highlighted example of that is when a variety of them told HP that they no longer wanted their business because they couldn't make money off that business anymore. This is happening if you're a mid-market or larger OEM. and you haven't started changing your strategy on this yet, you're behind the ball. You better get moving. These people are walking away from that business. And where they're going, by the way, is either to the retailers or developing their own OEM brands because it's higher margins. OEMs aren't necessary for retailers like Walmart. Walmart, a lot of these places, go to the ODMs directly and get their own products built. They don't even, it's commoditized product, right? So that you jump right over the OEM, you get right to the retailer, and they're just branding. Say, I want laptops, call them whatever Walmart calls them, and they sell them. And the OEM wasn't even necessary in that engagement. So this is happening, and the reason it's happening, this is a complicated chart. What it is intended to show is that the margin expectation between EMS and ODM companies, the margin that they make on the work and what they're selling, it's minimal between them right now. And it reflects kind of, there's some that are more positive for EMS, some more positive for ODMs. The real story behind this one chart is that the margin expectations are fairly slim and have really been reduced, whereas years ago there was far greater difference benefiting the ODMs, quite frankly. Supply risks are high. Avnet was talking about that just earlier. I'm here to reiterate that. We've been talking about this for a while. We stated this earlier in the year. We thought it was very likely that OEMs, listen, things go wrong in the supply chain all the time. Things go wrong in these relationships all the time. Work that is placed with an EMS provider by an OEM in hopes of having it built. Every quarter there are examples of ones that have to, it doesn't work and they have to move it and they have to change it somewhere else. That doesn't get a lot of press, but talk to people in the industry, it's pretty clear that that's going on. So we think it was very likely there was a serious disruption in calendar year 2012. I think that happened. We would produce, and did for a period of time, a quick story. We did what we called our Composite Business Risk Index, which took about 20-some factors, are all listed in the fine print down here, and we've run them exactly the same way, and we run them almost on a weekly basis just to kind of track it, public data. And the level of risk in the industry was simply going up and going up and going up. We thought, and you see how we do it, we're the standard error. You see what happened during the 2008 when it started settling down. We thought, well, it's going to settle down and taper back off. That never happened. This includes geopolitical issues and the horrible disasters in Japan and in Thailand had an impact on these things. What we realized when we were talking about risk is that the industry doesn't like talking about risk. So I don't have the slide, but we flipped this. So we now talk about the wellness index. The wellness index is the exact inverse of this. So just imagine this, just flip it over, and that's our wellness index. And the wellness level is pretty low in the industry, to the point it's at about and we've changed the numeric factors there. What I'd say that as an industry, if we were a person, we should be in the hospital, because the wellness of the industry is not very good. And that's not anybody's fault that's here in the audience, nor is it mine. It's just a fact of the issues that are impacting this industry. Why is risk going up? What's going on in the industry? I'm not going to belabor every one of these. The top one is the biggest one, though. Prices are down, but costs are up. The EMS industry has suffered from the irrational expectation from OEMs that there could be continual cost downs in this industry and that somehow that's sustainable. And EMSs, of course, have been scrambling for years trying to make that a reality to keep their OEM customers happy. But the costs, the underlying costs for the EMS providers have been going up. But the OEMs have this expectation that their pricing will be going down. It's simply unsustainable. There are various other and fewer resources at OEMs worldwide. OEMs have discovered that they've pretty much beaten their EMS providers into submission, so they're looking at other places for cost savings. There are far fewer people in a lot of mid-market OEMs these days taking care of the supply chain. Demand cycle is shortened, businesses are operating faster, supply chain concentration in Asia. Nothing wrong with Asia as a solution. Putting everything in Asia increases risk. Which is, again, the issue before about regionalization regaining popularity. Loss of institutional continuity, capital markets issues, geopolitical risk is a major issue that underlies this. And frankly, overtaxed infrastructure in a lot of low-cost countries. If you're interested in any one of these, we have go to our website, and there's a discussion of each one of these in far greater detail than I'm able to kind of present today. The loss of institutional continuity is an interesting one. I'll bring it there. I'll drive that point home here in a minute with one of the points I make. If you talk to the C-level suite within a lot of OEMs, and even it's probably CMs, but most, I think, acute at OEMs, C-level, CEO, CFO, COO, CIO, all those, their understanding of the business is far different than the supply chain professionals who work for them. And there is a real issue going on, kind of a clash between those in the organizations that we see. We recently completed a year-long study that we titled Beyond Outsourcing, the Future Landscape of Electronics Manufacturing. I'm going to talk about some of that here, not a lot of it. I'll be giving another talk tomorrow, focus clearly on this one. So let me go through some of the top 10 issues that we heard from this. Problems with the ODM community across the board. OEMs realize that these, by the way, this is us talking to the primarily OEMs, but also to EMS and ODM providers for this study. OEMs know that the ODMs are disengaging with them. They recognize that. The EMSs who are smart should be looking at this and jumping in and trying to figure out how to do that. But do it, figure out how to do it with a profit. Big challenge for the EMS industry is what we call profitless prosperity, right? You take any business just to grow that top line, meanwhile your bottom line, your actual profitability is declining. Industry as a whole, it's declining. I have to apologize. At the very beginning of this, I forgot one major disclaimer. All of our data is not inclusive of Foxconn. We do not include Foxconn in any of our studies. We do not, and this by design. We simply do not include them. We do not reflect them. We have an opinion that I will not be sharing here today, but Foxconn is not there. On the growth projection issues before, all the EMS industry growth projections, take Foxconn out of those analysis, and the industry's flat. There's essentially been no growth for the last few years. Most of the growth has been thankful to Foxconn. Moving on here, though. Large EMS offering extremely competitive alternatives. It's interesting. Flex SBS is here at the show. Flextronics, number 2 EMS by size in the world, is developing business specifically for smaller, higher mix, lower volume, more complex type of stuff than would necessarily have been built in their high, 24/7 factories in low-cost regions of the world. Very aggressively going at that. There is serious concern expressed by the industry about long-term viability of China and its ability to sustain its position within the industry. There's some concern with other Southeast Asian alternatives, primarily Vietnam. Most of those, even with India, has a lot of concern expressed with it. Most of that has to do with infrastructure issues. OEMs need to be involved. This is OEMs telling us this. They need to be involved in the design and procurement of all fabricated or custom parts. EMS industry has existed based on PPV. You know what PPV is. I hope I'm not speaking purchase price variance. That's going away. So EMSs need to get comfortable on either making money on MVA, manufacturing value add, or by diversifying their revenue streams in other type of services. I'll talk about that in just a moment here. OEMs cannot depend on EMS ODM to save money on any materials. They need to negotiate their own contracts. This is the OEMs telling us this. OEMs are going to be reclaiming ownership of the materials part, and EMSs need to react to this inevitability. And within the next 5 years, it'll be just standard practice. And I'll tell you, the industry got into the trouble and the situation it's in based by following what the big guys did, and that's how this is playing out too. Major OEMs in the world are doing this already. This is underway. This isn't a forecast. This is happening, has been happening all year. And so you need to adjust to this. You need to start recognizing the reality of the sea change and start adjusting your business behaviors and your practices to what is happening out there. OEMs cannot depend on a single supply solution. Nobody likes one of anything. unless you're married, maybe you like one spouse at a time, but for the industry as a whole, it's single sourcing is far too risky for these people. This gets into the issue I was talking about before. So outsourcing, the final assembly and tests, customized to order, build to order is considered a serious mistake by supply chain professionals. Their management wants them to outsource this. The supply chain professionals in the OEMs think this is a serious mistake. Smaller regional and large tier CM solutions work better for OEMs. The reason is there's more change. So at the small end, it tends to be very stable. The large end, pretty stable in their operations. The middle parts of the EMS industry, there's a lot of change going on. There's acquisitions, M&A and activity. There's change. OEMs don't like that change. So they see the ends of either end of the industry as being much more stable. A new product introduction is something supply chain professionals think should be done 100% in-house, versus management who thinks that this is a good thing to outsource. And supply chain professionals, I'll end on this one here on this slide, don't believe management understands and takes risks seriously. This is what they're telling us. And there's a quote of it: "We're taking way too much risk. They dump the accountability on us and demand continually lower costs." Supply chain professionals recognize that it's unsustainable. A lot of the C-level suite does not. Last slide. I hope I have time. I do. What is the EMS industry doing? In some cases, the transformation appears to be focused around an expansion of services. What type of design engineering, aftermarket requirements, AMS, aftermarket services become a huge push for especially Tier 1 EMS for quite a few years, and expanded logistics services. Like I said earlier, though, if you look at the percent of revenue that the EMS industry earns off these various services, compared 10 years ago till today, and I'll have a slide showing that tomorrow, it's moved 2 percentage points, despite a dedicated push by the EMS industry to gain more of that. And in other areas, it's clearly an IP or product-oriented directions that EMSs are moving. They're moving into software development. They're moving into electronic components, finding something that they can build and that is unique. And marketing, in some cases, their own product or family of products. And there's some very good, there's an EMS Stadium in the UK, smaller one, just bought a small OEM. They're still an EMS, but they have an OEM piece of the business now. What are they doing? So there is a sea change underway. I think most of the major OEMs of the world are engaged in a planned phased strategy that will play out over several years. But it has begun, folks, and it will be here. And if you're an EMS company, I'd love to talk to you. I think that doesn't mean it's all doom and gloom, give up hope. It means that your strategy needs to change. You better figure out how to make profit in an industry that is changing. I have a few minutes left here, I think. I'm amazed that I did that in 25 minutes. Thank you very much. And if there's any questions or comments or anybody wants to challenge me, I'll take a few questions now and continue this another time. Sir. Okay. The question is, what is Foxconn? That's a great question. A lot of people have been at. Foxconn is the #1 contract manufacturer in the world. They build mostly for Apple. They've been notorious lately for what's been going on there. Foxconn came from nowhere. They were a connector company, and they've grown into a very dominant, and they service about 20 major OEMs globally. Yeah, enough said. They're big. They're huge. If no other questions, I will end now. I thank you for your attention, and I'm doing something tomorrow. Come on by. We'll continue the discussion. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Philip Stoten. I'm at Electronica 2012, and I'm joined, as I have been for the last couple of days, by Eric Miscoll. Eric, thanks very much for joining me. It's been a lot of fun. I wanted to start by talking about some of the presentations you've been doing. The first presentation you did this week was on the topic of the changing environment in the contract manufacturing world. We've all seen and heard examples of that this week, but what What are you seeing in terms of the big picture globally?
Yeah, that presentation covered a variety of issues. Just to highlight a few, where to begin? There's one of the big issues. Obviously, has been the increasing costs, underlying costs in the industry. A lot of that is driven by labor rates in China. Everybody went to China. And I think that is kind of, as those have increased, OEMs have been forced to reconsider and rethink, really, the solutions they put in place, which in often cases have not been very effective for them.
Okay.
What I was telling the audience was that sometimes cheap can be very expensive. Specifically, going to China, in all of our data sets, the main point that correlates with increased risk to companies and the supply chain is the number of time zones you put between where the order is placed and where the order is fulfilled.
Okay.
More time zones, more risk, ultimately more cost. So, and I think as people are doing total cost of outsourcing analyses, they're starting to look at those pieces. And that in turn drives this whole return to regionalization that we're experiencing.
And this thing that we call reshoring or whatever. Before we go on to that, you think initially the whole drive to Asia, I mean, it felt a bit like a rush of lemmings towards a cliff edge. Yeah. But someone drove that to begin with. It felt like Wall Street, the markets were driving it to an extent, but people kind of went willingly, didn't they?
Yeah, there is a lot of lemming-like behavior in this industry, and I think so. To answer your question directly, yeah, a lot of blame can be shared by Wall Street. It was the wrong thing. It was this focus on quarter. It was a very poor understanding of the dynamics, not understanding manufacturing, not understanding supply chains, but understanding bottom line and that laser-like focus on that. And it was interesting because part of what happened at that time, I don't know if you remember, the U.S. had outsourced to Mexico. Mexico is a great solution, is a great solution for the U.S. market. Well, this whispering campaign started about quality problems, that Mexico is full of quality problems, has all these quality problems. There's as many quality problems there as there's in any other factory anywhere else in the world, right? You have the same issues. There's nothing unique to it, and it really was a whispering campaign. I think, not to be conspiracy theory here, but I think that helped make it easier to move to China, saying, well, we got these qualities here, listen, we can go to China and we get it. And there was this great desire to penetrate the market there in China. I don't know how successful that has been, but yeah.
So China builds this huge factory for the world, as they like to call it, this huge manufacturing facility, and then internationally we start to realize that actually everything happening there and shipping this big product back doesn't necessarily work. The distance in the supply chain is causing some stresses and strains, and we say, okay, well, that's not quite right. Hopefully we learn some lessons. What do we do about it, and what are we doing about it now as an industry? So
that's that return to regionalization, onshoring, repatriation. It goes by many terms, which is the sensible solution. It's back to the beginning, right? So build in region for region. Every major region of the world has a high cost, low cost part. Europe, Western Europe has Eastern Europe. North America, we had in the United States and Canada, we had Mexico and some others. Asia, China, but even within China, within Asia, China isn't the lowest cost anymore. Vietnam and India are, right? Now, I'm not advocating moving everything there. No. If you're only wanting the lowest cost labor in the world, then we should all move to sub-Saharan Africa because it's the cheapest labor on the planet. I'm not advocating that for anybody.
No.
But if that's all the interest is, and so fortunately, and part of the discussion this week on the panels and in the interactions here, has been this increased sophistication and maturity, really, within the OEMs and the understanding of these issues, and not just focusing just on that labor cost, but saying, listen, there's a whole cost. And part of that, quite frankly, in our analysis is the cost internal to the OEM, which is quite significant and really underestimated by many OEMs as to what their cost is in the support of managing and acquiring that. You want to focus on cost reductions, put a little focus there.
And cost of ownership or cost to serve or whatever mixture of those terms you want to use. So they sold us this dream of manufacturing Asia. It would be cheaper, it would be fine. Not the case. They also sold us a couple of different models. They sold us the EMS model, they sold us the ODM model where the intellectual property moves in different places. How are people seeing that mix now? Are they still, is the ODMs always seem to make a little bit more money? Are they still doing that? Are they still enjoying some success?
So, two comments. The first one on, to be very clear, so this is not about in any way, denigrating China's solution. China is a great solution, has great factories for certain types of manufacturing, right?
Absolutely, no doubt.
And a lot of it belongs there. Cell phones probably belong there, right? Game stations probably belong there. Heavy industrial equipment probably doesn't belong there, right?
Unless it's being used there.
Unless it's being used there,
Yeah.
exactly. So again, in region makes sense, but not having everything, these big bulky things made there and shipped elsewhere. To your question on the solution, EMS, ODM. ODM historically, which is primarily a Taiwanese-based activity, where they design and manufacture a ready off-the-shelf product, was a great solution, was an easy transaction. But what happened was OEMs had an expectation that the service level would be higher. So and ODMs traditionally had a much higher profit margin than EMS. If you look at that over the last 5 years, 6 years, you see it just plummeting.
Yeah. And
And that's a direct result of the OEM service requirements.
Yeah.
So what's happened is ODMs have are moving away from the OEM community, and they're saying, we don't want your business, we can't make money on it. This is unacceptable. And they've done this in very overt ways. And I'm not, again, this is happening, has been happening for the past year, not just with the big OEMs, but with mid-market ones as well, where all of a sudden they're finding their solutions, where they're saying, I want this and that, I want to change this, and they're just saying no.
Yeah.
And these Western OEMs aren't used to hearing no from their suppliers like that. What I'm telling the EMS community is, within there should be opportunity for you. How can you position yourself to identify and get some of the business like that? Flextronics, frankly, was very successful getting some HP business that the ODMs walked away from last year, and Flex jumped in and was able to pick it up.
Yeah,
So.
and be careful when you do pick it up that you don't become an ODM.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that can damage your EMS business. So what we've got is a whole bunch of dynamics at play. We went to Asia, we realized it wasn't the right thing. During that period, the costs in China rose as well, so there's a bit more of an evening out there. We see some reshoring in terms of manufacturing, particularly when it's large form factor. If I'm an EMS and I'm sat in the audience listening to this and it's all making perfect sense to me, the question I want to ask you at the end of that is, well what do I do next? How do I leverage that? How do I prepare for that new or the landscape as it lies now?
No, and that's the $10,000 question. And the answer, what we see in the industry is really...
Just $10,000?
Well,
that's a good deal.
I'm giving you a deal here. I'm giving you the China price. It falls into two categories. One is a service-based one. And in that service space, you see a lot of EMS who have tried to expand in other services. Design services being one on the front end, and on the back end, kind of aftermarket services. But as I indicated in both of my presentations, if you look at it over the last 10 years, as a overall percent of the EMS revenue, it's moved the needle very slightly. It's, I think, 3 percentage points. It went from 4 to 7% of overall revenue for the EMS industry, which is interesting. So what is that telling us? The market, even though there's dedicated effort to do that, really isn't buying into it, because they're probably not really, OEMs are conditioned to low cost, so why are they all of a sudden, why are you going to come to me and say, you're cheap here, but I'm expensive here? They're going to say, no, you're cheap.
You're cheap, that's your job.
So what is really happening, what we're kind of pushing our EMS clients more towards, is more of kind of a product type of a solution. What we're seeing there is, in some cases, you see EMSs acquiring component type businesses.
Right.
And there's several examples of that in the industry, and I think we'll see more of that. You know, buy something, right, and have something that it has higher margin. The other one is find other services. Go into your customers, look around. What else are they doing in that factory? Besides, primarily what EMS does is PCBA. What else are they doing? There are great examples in the industry where they go in and in some cases develop like a repair service for a product, because by walking around looking outside of the PCBA lens, you see that your OEM is still struggling doing this, and it's a real nuisance to them. There's an opportunity. So really kind of look within that for more types of things.
Okay.
In some cases, some are buying outright OEMs. There's
Right.
the example of the one in the UK that we discussed the other day that's doing that. Went out, small EMS in the UK bought a small OEM. You know, what are they doing? They're trying to get higher margin work.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, makes sense.
So there's lots of opportunity in the market there.
Okay, okay. Well, thanks very much for chatting to me about that, Eric, and we'll speak again. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.